Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. What a wonderful group. I arrived yesterday morning. I spent a lot of time yesterday talking with various people from the community. It's such a pleasure to be part of such an engaged and vibrant group of change agents from right across the world. So it's a real pleasure to be with you and to be part of this. And I really hope that once I start this project looking at the University Innovation Fellow Programme, I'll get to speak to more of you over the coming months. But what I'm talking about today is reward and recognition systems. And as Humera said, I've worked actually as a consultant for 15 years, and before that as an academic at Imperial College and leading a programme of educational change across the Faculty of Engineering at Imperial. And through that period, it's become clearer and clearer to me that the reward and recognition systems, the appointment, tenure and promotion criteria of faculty is a major inhibitor to educational change. And as I'm sure you are all acutely aware, change in universities as elsewhere really rests on culture, cultural change. You know, I'm sure a lot of you have heard something around the lines of, that's not how we do it here. Actually shifting that culture, making a change is incredibly difficult. And reward and recognition systems very much feed that culture, but they also mirror that culture. And the extent to which many of the things that you are doing, and teaching and learning in particular, plays a prominent role in reward and recognition system is a major inhibitor to educational change. And as a consultant, I was just looking through, I do a lot of one-to-one interviews, anonymous interviews with faculty and university leaders and students. I've spoken to about 1,500 faculty and university leaders one-to-one over the last 15 years. And it's rare that they don't talk about reward and recognition systems. And this is when we're talking about educational change. I would say 90% of the time they talk about the reward and recognition systems at their universities and how they're an inhibitor to educational change. So that's where I came at this, feeling that I'd like to do what I can to change the status quo. And I should say that when I first started this work, and a lot of it has been alongside the other projects that I've been doing, talking to other people in higher education, and said I'd like to try and change promotion or help universities to change promotion systems so they better reward and recognize teaching. A lot of people smiled and said good luck because that ain't gonna happen. And I wouldn't say it's down to me, but I would say particularly in the last 5 years, there's been a huge shift across the sector, not everywhere, but in certain pockets around the world. This is really changing and really changing rapidly. And it's something that's really fabulous to witness. And I hope I can give you a little bit of a taste of that shift and that change in culture towards better rewarding and recognizing teaching. So just to start off, this may need to connect again. Ah, great, fantastic. So just to say, I've used the term university teaching as a catch-all term to cover any contributions or impact in teaching and learning that an individual faculty member makes. So, you know, that is teaching, it is tutoring, it's curriculum change, it's policy change, anything that has an impact on teaching and learning within your institution. So I'm just used that word university teaching. But what I want to talk about is this project. I think we've got a little delay between the button and the action, but there, thank you. And what I want to talk about is this collaboration of universities. We called it the Advancing Teaching Network, but it's a global network of universities that are committed to improving the reward and recognition systems with respect to teaching at their institutions. And I was going to press the button there, talk about three or address three questions. The first is, why should universities change? their reward and recognition systems. I've talked about why I care about it, but why should universities change? The second is what might we change it to? What might these new systems look like? The third is how are universities tracking the impact of that? It's one thing making a change to policy, it's another making a change to the culture and what actually happens in practice. And finally, giving you some examples of the changes that are happening, because there's a huge amount happening. So starting first with the why. So just to take you back, and I know in the fabulous talks you had this morning, some people talked about their own journeys through some of the changes that they're making. I started looking at this about 10 years ago, and I actually approached the Royal Academy of Engineering in the UK and said, can I do a survey of UK faculty looking at the extent to which teaching and learning plays a meaningful role in promotion, appointment and tenure. And I called the study, I called the study, Does Teaching Advance Your Academic Career? And if I could summarize the findings of a 80-page report in a single word, it would be no. You don't need to read it. But there was a lot of insight in there. It was a survey of UK academics and interview feedback. And it was pretty stark. You know, it really was a no. We don't believe that this activity advances our academic career. And a couple of quotes from that report. In there, teaching just doesn't get you promoted, pure and simple. Teaching is a second-tier activity when it comes to promotion. And these were the themes that came through very strongly from that survey. And that really got me to thinking about what is the problem that we're dealing with? What is it that's happening here? And from there, I interviewed about 200 academics and university leaders, not just from the UK, but from across the world, to try and understand a little bit more about what's happening. And being an engineer by background, I tried to put together a model of how is teaching and learning, or university teaching, currently rewarded. If you imagine along the horizontal axis, you've got the teaching achievement of an individual faculty member, and on the vertical axis you've got the reward given to that individual by their institution through the promotion tenure process. This, to me, in blue, is what seems to happen at most institutions. That there's a threshold here that I've called A, below which, a threshold of achievement in university teaching, below which there are consequences. Let's say you get very poor student feedback in the student survey for your course. There may be consequences in terms of your career. You may be asked to improve your teaching before you get considered for promotion. At the other end of the scale, at B, at most institutions, there may be 1 or 2 people per year who are exceptional, who are really not just an institutional leader, but maybe a national or global leader in teaching and learning, getting promoted to full professorship on the basis of their teaching and learning. But very often they're full-time in teaching and learning. So you have those two extremes beyond which there are consequences for contributions to university teaching. But at many institutions between those two, there are really no incremental benefits career-wise to contributions to teaching and learning. It may not be a plateau, but very often it's very little more than a plateau. And actually 90% of people, probably more, 95% of people, of faculty engaged in teaching and learning would sit between those two extremes. And I talked to a lot of university leaders about this and said, do you recognize this within your own institution? And a lot of them said, yes, I recognize it and I want to do something about it, but there's 2 things that are holding me back from making a change. One of them is, how do you define what teaching achievement is as you move up that horizontal axis? Is it about the impact on your students? Is it about more students? Is it about publishing in educational journals? Or is it about something else? What does moving up this horizontal axis actually mean? And how do we carve that up in terms of improving the reward and recognition for teaching as you move up that axis? And the second issue holding them back is, excuse me, it's about evidence. What evidence does an individual put on the table, put in their resume to actually demonstrate the impact that they have in teaching and learning? We know what that evidence looks like in research, but it's difficult to know what that evidence looks like in teaching and learning. I'm just going to move down here in case the connection is better. So that evidence is a real issue, and these are the two things that we really wanted to deal with. You know, how do we improve and think about the definitions of teaching achievement that will help people to progress their career, but also how do we think about what evidence they need to put on the table in order to be considered for promotion? So the second question, I might do this manually actually. So the second question that we looked at was what might these new career pathways look like? And through this process we started to talk to a lot of universities, pulling together particularly university leaders that were committed to make a change. And we started to develop a new framework that would better reward and recognise teaching that people could implement within their institutions. And we, as we started to develop this, we called it the Career Framework for University Teaching. And we developed it collaboratively with these institutions and with a lot of researchers in teaching and learning from across the world. We piloted it at 15 universities worldwide to see in different cultures, in different institutions, with different disciplines, does this work? Because it needs to work across the whole institution, whether that be in the dance school, whether that be in philosophy, whether that be in engineering. It needs to work across the entire institution. So we spent actually about 4 or 5 years developing, testing, piloting this. And thank you. And what we did was if you think about this, thank you, it actually overlaid across this to try to make a series of a progressive improvement for a career progression in teaching and learning above that. Oh, I'll do it, thank you. So we developed this new framework, and it was safe for application across all disciplines, all institution types, and it's for all academics. This isn't for people who are on a teaching and learning career pathway. This is for everybody who teaches. And resting on the principle that all academics that teach, regardless of their role, should continue to strengthen the quality and impact of their teaching activities throughout their career. And that's really where we wanted to come from with this. And just to briefly say, we created these 4 levels, and it's very much about impact, the impact that that individual has. And this kind of cumulative sense, starting with the students. So at level 1, it's about the impact you have on the students. But as you move through, at the second levels, it's also about the impact that you have on your colleagues as part of that teaching team, as part of the program team of supporting students and supporting learning. And at the third level, about institutional impact as an educational leader. I think we've got a room full of people who fall into that category, and in most systems there isn't a mechanism to reward that. You know, people who have a profound impact on the culture and capacity for teaching and learning within their institutions. In very few institutions is that even articulated in the promotion system, let alone rewarded for those individuals. And it's that particular group that we really focused on very heavily, because those are the group that really have a legacy at their institution. They're not just teaching, they're actually having an impact beyond the point that they leave that institution. And very often those people are left out in the cold in terms of the promotion systems. So these institutional leaders, but also impact in educational knowledge as long as it impacts practice at that level. And then at the top level, global and national leaders in teaching and learning. So these 4 kind of coherent levels, and underneath those is a set of promotion criteria. You know, at an effective teacher level about your attitude and delivery, right up to the top level about your influence. I should say all of this is open source. Everything that I'm talking about, all of the information is all on the website. Actually, it's along the bottom there, and you're very welcome to use it. A lot of people have actually used it whose universities aren't using the framework, but actually for their own career development, when they're putting together promotion cases, actually giving resources and information and helping them to think about the evidence that they need to put together when they put together their promotion case. So there's a lot more information underneath that I'll happily share. I've got some booklets and information as well for anyone who's interested. So we developed this and we started working with this group of universities. We started meeting every year in an event really not dissimilar to this, of people who were driving change within their universities. A lot of them were vice presidents for teaching and learning at their universities, but they were at some institutions it was the head of HR, at some institutions it was the head of the teaching and learning lab. So people wearing quite different hats, but committed to making a profound change to the academic career pathways and reward systems at their universities. So we started to pull people together, and a question that people started asking is, okay, so we're changing the career pathways, we're changing the reward systems. How do we know that it's working? How do we know that it's having the kind of impact that we want? Because a lot of people talked about changing the policies, but having absolutely no impact on what happens, on who gets nominated for promotion, how they're evaluated, and what happens to people's careers, and not having an impact crucially on the culture within the institution. So this, how do we know what impact it's having, is a big question. So from the point that we developed the career framework, actually a question that people asked first is, how do we change? So a project that we did a few years ago was looking at universities that had already changed their promotion and reward systems, successes and failures, and we looked at what are the common factors amongst the successful universities that tried to make this change. So that was the first question they asked. And then the second question was how do we know what impact it's having? So we launched what we call the Teaching Cultures Survey, which was tracking the culture and status of teaching at institutions that are either making these changes or planning or hoping to make these changes. So we had the first one in 2019 and then the second one in 2022. So we're tracking this over time with 3 data points. And I'll just give you a little snapshot of the findings from the survey because it's been fascinating. The survey is aiming to capture and track the culture and status of teaching. Self-selecting universities, 25 universities taking part. There are more joining, so for the next survey we'll have at least 5 or 6 new institutions that are going to come on board, but all universities that are committed, who are either changing their systems or hoping and planning to change their systems. So it's 25 universities from across the world, from across 10 countries taking part. Some are universities represented here. I know Twente is one of them. There's a couple of other institutions that I think from what I've heard people say are from the institutions taking part. And it focuses in 4 areas. One is about the institutional environment. One is about the cultures and priorities. What do you perceive your university to take seriously in terms of rewarding teaching and learning? The third is about experiences with institutional systems like promotion systems or annual appraisals. To what extent is teaching and learning taken seriously in those? And then what do you expect to change at your university and what would you like to change at your university with respect to reward and recognition of teaching? So we've just finished the second of the surveys. With participants across, and we worked really hard to make sure that the participants in the survey were representative of the communities within those universities. So we weren't just getting the people interested in teaching and learning taking part. So I'm just going to give you an example of one question that was on the survey, looking at the processes. And this is looking at promotion to full professorship, because that's a step in the academic career ladder that's pretty common across every university, wherever you go in the world. It happens at a pretty comparable stage. And it was a pair of questions. The first half of the pair was, how important would you like each of the following activities to be for promotion to full professor at your university? for a typical research education contract. In 4 buckets, like 4 kind of key academic buckets: university teaching, research, external engagement, entrepreneurship and service, the 4 kind of key areas. So how important would you like each of these to be in promotion to full professorship? We gave them 5 options: not important, somewhat important, very important, it depends on the academic, and don't know. And I'm just going to focus on those that said, I would like it to be very important. And this is what we got, and it was a pretty consistent picture across all institutions. 77% said they'd like research to be very important. 65% less, but still 2/3 said I would like teaching to be very important. So the other half of that question is, okay, this is what you would like to happen. What does happen at your institution? To what extent are these very important in promotion to full professorship? And this is the findings. So 86% said at my institution research is very important. 29% said at my institution university teaching is very important. And the difference between those, I think, is very telling. Not only does it say there's a big, that only less than 1/3 think that university teaching is very important in promotion at their institution, but 2/3 would like it to be. And I think that difference really sends a strong signal to those institutions that there's a mandate for change here. 2/3 of your academics would like there to be a profound change. And there's some really interesting findings beneath that about who's saying that, and which groups at the university are least likely to believe that their university rewards and recognises teaching. And there's some interesting differences by seniority in terms of what people believe is happening. A high proportion of the people who said that of that 29% were university leaders. When you get further down the ladder in terms of seniority, fewer and fewer people believe that university teaching is taken seriously. So that's the tracking of the why. The 1/3 of those surveys is to come soon. And then the final question is global exemplars, because there's a huge amount happening, even over the pandemic when there was so much else happening and so many other pressures. There's been a real momentum for quite fundamental change at universities across the world. So there's a lot of individual universities that are making changes. One example from my own country, from UCL in the UK, which is very much seen in the UK, as I'm sure elsewhere, as a strong research-led university that's consistently in the top 10 of the university rankings worldwide. They made a huge change, and they're a very strong part of the Advancing Teaching Network. They made a huge change, launched about 5 years ago, focused around impact. They changed everything, not just teaching, but all 4 kind of buckets of academic activity. Allowing the academic to have much more flexibility as they move through their career. They can identify, they have to have a threshold, a level of achievement in all domains, but they can focus on external engagement or teaching or research and change that as they move through their careers. And that has had a huge impact at UCL already in terms of who's being promoted and the kind of support systems that are in place. But it's not just individual universities that are making changes. And something that's come up through the group, not by the group, but through the group, since we've been working over the last 7 or 8 years, is countries making change together. Whole countries saying all of our universities will work together to change our academic career pathways, change our award systems, and make that shift, reduce the risk by all moving at the same time. I'll just give you 4 countries that are quite prominent in making change. Denmark, this has been a bottom-up change of changing their award systems across all research-led universities in the country. Malaysia is a top-down government approach, but they're changing all of their career pathways within the country. Norway is creating this thing called pedagogical merits, which sit alongside the career pathways, but make a huge difference. Again, all Norwegian universities are making a change. But probably the biggest single change is in the Netherlands. All 14 Dutch university presidents of research-led universities have come together and said, we're going to do things differently. We're going to make a change. It's not a prescriptive model, but we're going to do something similar so that all our career pathways better reward and recognise not just teaching, but other things like external engagement. Really thinking about the impact that we have. But it allows mobility of academics in the way that academics that have strength in research can go anywhere in the world with their achievements. It allows much more mobility for the academics that have strength in teaching and learning. So this change in the Netherlands is really huge. They published a white paper in 2020 called Room for Everyone's Talent, and it was very much, it said, from the white paper here, it's a new balance in the recognition and reward for academics, including placing less emphasis on the number of publications and a greater emphasis on other domains in which the academic is active, such as education and impact. So a change that they're designing and developing as we speak. And they have three key areas of focus. One is flexibility, that there's a diversification. There's not a one-size-fits-all. You can be a different kind of academic with different kinds of achievements and areas of focus. A balance between the individual and the collective in terms of your impact as part of a team, and part of the stimulating open science, the open source commitment that they have within the Netherlands. It's not just the universities that are making these policy changes. The government is now strongly supporting the effort and investing quite significant sums of money in supporting the change. So one of the things that they've launched is this Comenius program. It's just over 6 million euros per year. And they've got 3 levels of fellowship for individual academics to invest in innovation in education for those individuals, so that they can take time out from their other duties. They can really develop new educational ideas. And this, they link this to the career framework for university teaching, which is actually flipped from the version I showed you before. But so the first level is to help people to move up to level 2 of the framework. The senior fellowships allow to help people move up to the 3rd level, and the leadership fellowships to help them move up to the 4th level. So these are mechanisms to improve teaching and learning within the institution, but also giving people a mechanism to advance their own academic careers within their institutions. So at this top level, it's €500,000, and they give out 4 of those per year. So really a big investment, both in educational innovation, but also into the career progression of those individual academics. And also, the universities themselves are not just changing their policies, they're thinking about the professional development of the individuals as well. Utrecht University has done some fabulous things on this, and so many of the universities that I'm working with are copying what Utrecht has done, because they've thought so carefully about how do we support academics right the way through. And in fact, they now have training and support for undergraduates who want to be undergraduate teaching assistants. So they're really thinking about that whole pipeline of support. And they've, flipping the framework on the other side, they've got a whole series of different professional development opportunities to support people as they move through the levels of the framework. Right the way up to, on the right-hand side there, the senior fellowships, which is very much focused on these educational leaders that I talked about. They take people in to a 3 to 5 year program, and they guarantee them a professorship at the end of it. So they're very selective about who they take in, but they provide them with, for about 2 days a week, support to develop them as educational leaders, to be role models and innovators and change makers within their institution. So these institutions are not just making these policy changes, but really thinking about how do you support and develop the individual academic as they move through. So I've got a lot more information available at the website. We made a lot of videos during COVID. I know we weren't alone there, but there's videos, with more information about what's happening within some of these countries and within institutions and the kinds of changes that they're making. But I'm really, really struck by how fast and how profound some of these changes are. It's obviously not happening everywhere, but the momentum of those institutions that are making change is huge. And I'd be really interested to see whether some of these institutions start to hoover up some of the best university educators. Because I think the point that they do, many other universities are going to start to look at their own promotion systems and wonder, how are we going to keep people here? And I think that in itself, the market forces and the competitive position actually could have quite a big impact. So coming back to the original question, does teaching advance your academic career? For a growing number of universities, the answer to that question is changing, and it's certainly not an unequivocal no anymore at those institutions. And just to finish, the things that we're doing as a group, the Advancing Teaching Group, we've got the next survey coming up in a couple of years' time. We're starting to look at a number of things like educational leadership, evaluating academic impact, other kinds of support systems. The next project we're looking at is best practices to try and help inspire and inform the changes that people are making, because there's an awful lot happening, not just within our group, but across the world, but actually pulling together some of those best practices, and that those will be all available next year if anyone's interested to keep track of that and to see where we are. So thank you very much. Thank you.